Max, give us your top level takeaway, because both Biden and Trump won, but President Biden is winning by significantly more.
Sure. It's interesting because what the Republicans will say tonight, they'll try to draw attention to that uncommitted vote, which in many ways is an expression vote. It's trying to send a message to a president that they still believe in, but they're looking to express themselves, which is democracy at its finest. But when you look at the Republican side, right, there is no one with a pulse who believed that Nikki Haley could win tonight. And nonetheless, nearly 1/3 of voters came out to vote against Donald Trump and vote for her. That right there is a vote about where they will stand in November. And that's the essence of Donald Trump's weakness here. Donald Trump, as a former president, should be winning 90% of the vote, 85% of the vote. But what he's constantly seen in primary after primary is, yes, he's got the base locked down, but he is struggling with a ceiling. It's that same ceiling that the Republicans saw in 22, in 20, and it's that ceiling that hates MAGA extremism. And nonetheless, today, once again, we see evidence of it.
Republicans are a party divided. And people often like to say, well, both parties are divided. But is that even true?
No.
Because just look at Congress, right? President Biden's agenda, right? He has had a largely centrist foreign policy agenda, a progressive economic agenda, and they've worked. If you look at how Democrats have voted in Congress since he took office, they're basically all on the same page. Republicans, they cannot even get their faction in order.
Well, they used to say, I'm not a member of an organized political party, I'm a Democrat. Those days are long gone. Of course, Speaker Pelosi had a razor-thin margin and was able to successfully advance out of the House monumental legislation, and literally the Republican caucus, with a similar margin, couldn't organize themselves out of a paper box. So they are totally disorganized. They can't get their act together. And that's also being reflected in these electoral results. Time and again, there's a really strong electoral bloc that wants nothing to do with MAGA-based extremism. That bloc is in the Republican Party, that bloc is in independents, and that bloc is, of course, amongst swing voters.
Michael, the Biden team knows how crucial Michigan will be in November. What are they taking away tonight? What are you hearing from them?
Well, Stephanie, when you think about why the Biden campaign, why the DNC, and why President Biden himself wanted Michigan to be part of this early voting window, right? This is the earliest they've ever voted in a nominating contest. It was because they wanted to highlight some of the strengths that President Biden has among key voting coalitions, among black voters, among union workers who have been so important to President Biden. That's the event he came here to do with those auto workers ahead of the primary. But what it's also done is expose some of the vulnerabilities that the president does need to work on if he's going to carry Michigan by the margins he needs to in order to be reelected president. Now, we talk about Dearborn. I spent all day talking to voters in Dearborn, and they are very animated and motivated to vote against the president, to vote for this uncommitted ballot line, because they wanted to send a message about what's happening in Gaza right now. But that you're not going to see that replicated across the country, because obviously the Arab American population is significant there in a way that it's not elsewhere. But whereas Steve Kornacki was laying out, there was also a significant uncommitted vote, was college campuses. We know that the Biden campaign has struggles with younger voters. You're going to see that on college campus across the country. The president, just last week, I was with him in California. He was holding an event about student loans. He didn't do it on a college campus, in part because they're concerned about the protests that have been emerging at these events. So, yes, this is a good night for Joe Biden. He's going to win the state. He's going to show some strength among those key voting groups he wanted to highlight. But it also does show some warning signs that a lot of Democrats have been trying to raise with the campaign that they need to address. But, Stephanie, they do have time to address it between now and November.
But, Mark, those uncommitted voters are voting against the president for now. As Max put it, an expression vote, because they are not happy about his support for Israel. But we also know that right now the president is pushing for a ceasefire. So is that proof that their efforts are working? He's listening.
It could be. I mean, I think we're going to see a few things. I mean, first, when you see the exit polling coming out and what voters how angry basically a lot of these protest voters are, whether they're planning to come home or whether they're not going to vote for Biden under any circumstances. You'll get a sense of whether the situation in the Middle East, no matter how it changes, will be so intractable that it could change their vote. I think the bigger issue is, frankly, young voters. I mean, as Steve was saying earlier, I mean, places like Ann Arbor, East Lansing, big college towns, which have, growing suburban populations around them. I mean, are these voters going to come home? And I think in the whole of it, I mean, Biden seems to have had a pretty good night, just like he did in New Hampshire, even though he wasn't on the ballot. I mean, there was some talk that Dean Phillips was going to way overperform and embarrass him there. He didn't. South Carolina, he did fine. Whereas Trump seems to be underperforming his polling to some degree, which I think could be very, troubling for the Trump campaign. But ultimately, I mean, we're going to see, whether Democratic voters are going to come home in the long term. And there are certainly warning signs here, but also it looks like the whole of the party seems to be solidly behind Biden.
Mark, you have covered Governor Gretchen Whitmer extensively. What kind of position is she in? While she is a superstar surrogate for the president, she's also in a complicated position, needing to be sensitive to her constituents who are casting those protest votes.
Yeah, she's been extremely cautious. I mean, her rhetoric has been, really scripted, and she's usually a fairly freewheeling rhetorical politician to some degree. And in some ways, I mean, she's run ahead of Biden, certainly in polls. And I think that, I think especially on the abortion issue, I mean, she's been very, very solid with a lot of the suburban, even Republicans that had sort of fled the Republican coalition over the last few years. She's been very, very strong there. But yeah, I mean, I think she's kind of riding in miniature the same kind of wave or the same kind of, the delicate situation that Biden has. And I think, she is, in a little bit better position now, but I think Biden is the one that's going to really feel the brunt of it going forward.
Max, nobody thought Nikki Haley was going to win, but she's still staying in the race with this idea that she's running as an understudy. She's running as the backup quarterback. But let's say Donald Trump does get knocked out. She's not going to control the delegates, and I cannot imagine they will turn and say, the person who's the thorn in Donald Trump's side, now we're going to back her.
Yeah, Mitt Romney would have a better chance of winning the Republican nomination than Nikki Haley at this point. And, it's almost commendable the way in which she's burned basically every bridge and relationship that she had in the party, because the party is not representative of that old school Republicanism any longer, or at least only a small sliver of it. In the end, the Republican Party, we like to talk so much about this cult of personality. I actually think it's gotten beyond that at this point. It is centered around a MAGA extremism that goes well beyond Donald Trump and will live well beyond him. And we would certainly see that should there be an open contested primary with Trump not on the ballot.
Michael, explain this one to us. President Biden made history in Michigan last year when he joined an auto worker picket line. No president has ever done that before. But new numbers from NBC show he's actually losing ground among union households to Donald Trump since 2020. Why is that? Is it about the everyday inflation, cost of groceries that have people down?
It's a fascinating question. It's one that the Biden campaign is spending a lot of time working on. And we have seen that at the leadership level, some of the nation's largest unions and their leadership have come out enthusiastically to support President Biden. But we are seeing something of a disconnect with some of those rank and file members of those unions. And it is for issues like inflation. You also can look at the Teamsters Union, the Firefighters Union. They have not yet endorsed President Biden. The Firefighters Union were the first union to endorse candidate Joe Biden 4 years ago. They, in fact, even did it before he got into the race. And when I spoke with one of the firefighter union representatives about why that is, he said, well, our members have other issues, too. He mentioned inflation, but he also mentioned Second Amendment rights as another example of ways in which these rank and file members maybe aren't lining up with the leadership. So the president really does have an economic story to tell. They want to spend more time over the course of the year translating the statistics that we talk about that you know so well, Stephanie, in a way that the average voter will understand. When you look at the State of the Union address next week, Stephanie, that's a major moment that the Biden campaign hopes to really begin that conversation with voters, including union workers.
All right, let's turn now to another major issue for Washington and the country. Congress now has 3 days to prevent a partial government shutdown again. My colleague Kelly O'Donnell has a look at today's big meeting that took place at the White House.
Their meeting described as intense yet productive. The president and congressional leaders facing urgent deadlines and differing priorities, from critical aid for foreign allies.
I think the consequences of inaction every day in Ukraine are dire.
To House Speaker Mike Johnson insisting the border crisis requires executive action from the president.
The first priority of the country is our border and making sure it's secure.
On top of that divide, threat of a phased federal government shutdown. Friday, the first wave of government departments and agencies run out of funds. Among them, the FDA, Transportation, and Veterans Affairs. March 8th, the rest could close, including Defense, Homeland Security, and Justice. A painful replay for 36-year-old Navy wife and mother of 2, Nikita Fowler.
This is not our first or even second government shutdown, and it's just the continuous worry of how this is going to impact our family.
Given the harsh consequences, talk of common ground.
The shutdown would damage the economy significantly, and I think we all agree to that, and we need a bipartisan solution.
Optimism, but no clear path yet from the speaker.
We will get the government funded, and we'll keep working on that.
Will they really? Max, you came into Congress in 2019 during a government shutdown. When they come back from vacation, what are these negotiations really going to be look like? And are they in good faith?
So here's the deal. The most important negotiations are actually happening within the Republican caucus. And, you know, the speaker's challenge is that he's wasted all his political capital. Of course, after they kicked McCarthy out, they said, we can't do this again next week. So, you know, Johnson had some room to maneuver. That's all gone. The second element of this, though, is that there's a significant portion of the Republican caucus that's never actually lived through a government shutdown. Marjorie Taylor Greene has never had to go through this. And what they don't understand, because they've never lived it, is that when you instigate a government shutdown, it is a guaranteed political loser. This is to say nothing of the fact that the Republican Party right now wants that government shutdown because they want to cut funding for those most in need and want to cut funding for our fight against extremism and radicalism abroad and not to be there for our allies. That's why they want to shut down government. And the American people, to a vast extent, don't support that. So what they're going to have to see, right, if they do shut down the government, is they'll start to see polls. They'll start to see people going on social media, turning against them. They'll start to get calls from their constituents, and they'll have to experience that in order to come back to the table. So there's still a chance. There's still a possibility, but it's not going to be Speaker Johnson who's going to actually be the one leading this. It is the extreme flank of his own party that kicked out McCarthy and now controls him.
Mark, a government shutdown does not help Trump. It does not help Republicans. But does it help depress the votes? People might not get off the couch in November for a government that doesn't work for them.
No, I mean, typically people will look to Republicans, especially since they control the House and will be seen as driving this. And there is a sense that, look, there are a lot more grown-ups in the Senate, in the White House at this point. And every time that the Republican Congress is front and center, we've seen this repeatedly over the last certainly year and a half, it's a really bad look for them. It's nothing but chaos, and there's not a sense that anyone is in charge. And look, I mean, Speaker Johnson is in a really, really rough position now. It's unclear, you know, how he could navigate this and still keep his job. I mean, he could probably do a deal, probably, you know, get it passed with a lot of Democratic votes, which would almost certainly lead to some kind of vacating of the chair, which is the same thing that happened to McCarthy, and then they have the next iteration of chaos. So, look, I mean, it's never good, I think, for Republicans when the House Republicans are front and center, and it looks like that's what's going to happen here.
Dave, this looks bad today, but when it comes to the judge making a decision, finding evidence that would remove her, did it move the needle, what we saw today?
A little bit, because this is no longer a question of a conflict of interest as much as it is about lying. because Nathan Wade submitted a sworn affidavit that said the relationship began after he was hired as special counsel and they split the expenses. Now the judge has to determine whether he's telling the truth. And if it, in fact, is proven that he and Fani Willis lied to the court, then they probably will be thrown off the case and sanctioned possibly by the Georgia bar.
Let's say the judge does throw them off the case. Then what happens to the investigation? If she chose to step down now versus if the judge removes her?
If she chose to step down, then the same thing would happen as if she's removed. It would go to the attorney general and then reassigned to another district attorney in Georgia who probably won't have the zeal about this case as Fani Willis, and it will be slow walked, in my opinion. We don't know for sure, but one thing I think for sure we know is that this case is not going to be tried before the election, and if she's thrown off the case, it may never be tried at all.
This has become so noisy that Fani Willis is now the central focus of the Georgia case. I do not remember the last time we talked about Donald Trump and the 20-odd other co-defendants. How big of a problem is that?
It's a problem. This was an unforced error. You know, the big lights are upon you when you go after the former president and you act recklessly like this. So, look, even if there was no conflict here, by the fact that they submitted that affidavit to the court, that set this whole thing in motion. This hearing never had to happen. They could have come clean, and then I think they would have moved on. I think Nathan Wade should have been removed as special counsel. But now this has already gone too far, and I think this is headed towards very likely disqualification.
Okay, let's say she's allowed to stay on. How does she do her job successfully? I don't know that I see a scenario where her name is out of this story.
Well, I think at least one of them will be disqualified. I think Nathan Wade has to go here. I think she could survive, possibly. And if she survives, she has to just rely on the other two special prosecutors. That's something a lot of people don't remember here, is that he's not the only special prosecutor. There are three of them, and they're all getting paid the same hourly rate. He, Nathan Wade, just happens to be billing a lot more than the others, and he is the one with the special relationship with the boss.
Can you explain to our audience why he bills more than others? That, in and of itself, raises a flag to some.
He's the head guy. Now, the biggest problem I had is that on one day he billed for 24 hours in the day. I've never heard of anyone doing that. And
oh, come on now, lawyers. There's one thing you all know how to do, bill.
Yeah, but for 24 hours, right? And so it doesn't look great. And there's this perception of a conflict. But to remove her, you have to have an actual conflict of interest, and they didn't have that, and I still don't think they have it right now, but it's not about a conflict anymore. It's about whether they lied, and that's what I mean by a self-inflicted wound.